Grace and peace to you this evening from God the Father and our Lord Jesus Christ. Welcome to our third study, our third session in the study of Proverbs. Tonight we'll be in Proverbs chapters 11 through 15. Just a quick reminder of where we have been. Last week, or 2 weeks ago, Joe led us through Proverbs 1 through 5, reminding us that the purpose of Proverbs is extremely practical. It is to ground God's wisdom in all of life. As Eugene Peterson pointed out in his introduction to Proverbs, that we might live out God's will on earth as it is in heaven. It is grounded in creation. In another spot, Peterson wrote that to live wisely is to avoid running your hand against the grain of the universe. And any of you who've ever worked with wood and trying to cut wood or saw through it, you know, if you go with the grain, then things go much easier. He also pointed out this is a key, sort of the theme verse of the entire book of Proverbs. The fear, that is the reverence, the awe, moving toward love and desiring to be in the presence of the Lord is the beginning of all knowledge. It's the ground of all our understanding of reality. It is the idea which shapes all of reality. But fools despise this wisdom and instruction. As C.S. Lewis put it, he said, talking about Christianity in particular, he said, I believe in Christianity as I believe that the sun has risen, not only because I see it, but because by it I see everything else. In a sense, that's what the book of Proverbs calls us to do, to see all reality as an outplaying of God's creative order, God's creative wisdom, as expressed in those two, or in the lady wisdom that David led us through last week in Proverbs 6 through 10. He reminded us of a couple of important things. Number one, wisdom is not simply knowledge. It is knowledge added to experience. I have a cross stitch that Judy made for me when I was much younger in band directing and trying to teach kids to tap their foot and play their notes at the right time. It has Iggy out watering his flowers in the middle of a rainstorm. And the caption beneath it says, know how doesn't do any good unless you know when. Well, that's what wisdom is. It's not only knowing how, but to know when, to know which of the Proverbs fits, whether it's more appropriate to keep your mouth quiet, to not argue with the fool, or whether it's more appropriate to step in and argue with the fool, lest he become wise in his own eyes. Other thing David reminded us of is that these are not guarantees of long life, nor of well-behaved children. This is the way God designed the world. But as you look at other wisdom books, Job and Ecclesiastes, you read that time and chance happen to all, that there are things that don't fit. Again, seeking later after the creation story, Genesis 3 says sin has entered the world, and sin has marred the creation. Sometimes you get the splinter even though you are working with the grain. But God's creation, God's purposes, God's will has put a certain order to the world, and as we live in accordance with that will, we end up being blessed. All right, as we begin here, I wanted to do a couple of big pictures, because as we're starting with Proverbs chapter 10, Proverbs 9 started this, but we began running into some characters. We ran in earlier chapters into Lady Wisdom and Dame Folly, the two ladies, both calling to the young men, both of them calling to say, come see what I have for you. And we saw the great difference that one of them leads to life and joy and peace, to follow the way of wisdom, but the other leads to death and men's bones hidden there. All right. Well, the characters that we're going to be looking at here in a little bit, and you'll see these really for the rest of the book. The first one is a simple the naive, the young man that the father kept appealing to say, look, this is the way life works. The definition of the simple one is that he is untrained. He's untrained morally, intellectually. He just doesn't know. And thus, he believes just about anything that comes up. If you've ever read the classic story of Pinocchio, right? The one who will simply follow anywhere. He does not have any background, any understanding, any knowledge or understanding of how to deal with life. Some verses in the section we're looking at tonight that deal with this. The simple believe anything, but the prudent give thought to their steps. That is, as you grow in wisdom and knowledge, you begin to learn how to look ahead. What might be the consequence of this action? Where might this go? What might others think of it? What would God think of it? All right? To think through before reacting. Don't simply believe, but to question. The simple inherit folly. That is, if you follow and believe everyone, you actually, instead of inheriting the kingdom of God, you'll inherit foolishness, because many of the choices before us are foolish. But the prudent are crowned with knowledge. The more you act in accordance with wisdom, the wiser you become. If I remember Gary Moss talking with me one time about studying math and learning math. He said oftentimes the reason that young people do not understand math is not that they don't understand, but they're not willing to stand under. That is, they're not willing to do the process, to follow through the process that they've been taught. Understanding comes later. All right, simply do what is called wise by the people who are wise. And this way you become crowned with knowledge. By the way, a couple other things as we start. Notice this section of Proverbs is much less of a story. They're a series for more than 15 chapters, in fact, almost 20, of short aphorisms. Many of them in this oppositional style where this is true, or this is a statement, but, right? This, but. So look for that in many of these Proverbs. This is the way of blessing, but this is the way which will bring consequences. So the simple or the naive. And what do you do with the simple or the naive? You teach them. They're willing, they're open. You alert them to the potholes before them. You alert them to the dangers. You make them aware of the joys. Right? You simply teach. Second, the fool. We read in Psalms that the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. Well, that is what the fool is. Though perhaps possessing mental intelligence, the fool is morally corrupt. The fool does not act as if there is a God. He steps off as if perhaps God does not see, perhaps God does not know, perhaps I will slip by with this. All right? The fool is one who acts as if there is no God. 12:15. The way of fools seems right. The wise listen to advice. See that oppositional statement there? Right? The way of fools, the first thought, yes, I think I will go that way. This is the way that provides money. This is the way that provides power. This is the way that provides pleasure. But the wise, the prudent, look forward and say, not so fast. All right? The fool is morally corrupt. He feels no sense of, of moral boundaries, of those things that ought not be done. Or if he has them, he suppresses them. Paul writes about these in Romans 1. Chapter 14. The wise fear the Lord and shun evil, but the fool is hot-headed, and yet somehow continues to feel secure. God doesn't know. God doesn't see. It's all going to work out. How many times in your life have you acted foolishly going, I'm sure it will work out. All right. One of my favorite jokes, you know how a middle school boy is about to do something foolish. He says, watch this, right? Somehow it will work out. The fool. What do you do with the fool? You teach as well. But sometimes, when you read the Proverbs, sometimes there has to be some consequences early on. There has to be some difficult talks. There have to be some consequences laid out ahead of time and enacted. The fool. Third character, the mocker. Other versions call this the scoffer. This is the one who goes beyond the fool. This is the one who is in active opposition to all authority. All right. This is not one who simply, in a sense, is merely self-centered, but this is one who is in active rebellion, reviles worship, reviles any authority above themselves. Not that they're not thinking about it or maybe it will work out this time. They really realize it's there. But they are actually unteachable. They have firmly rejected God. Some verses here. The mocker seeks wisdom and finds none. Well, of course he can't. He's rejected the premise that the fear, the reverence, the awe of God is the beginning of all knowledge, which that knowledge, when we act upon it, leads to wisdom. He has rejected that foundation, so he, of course, cannot find any. But knowledge comes easily to those who have lived in God's presence, who live in this world, who see the way it works, all right, and who, more than that, live within the community of God's people who remind us how that works. Mockers resent correction, so they avoid the wise. Wow. You ever had one of those conversations with your children where they're avoiding you? Or perhaps with someone who works for you and you can't seem to find them around? Or they're always busy? Yeah. Those who are in the process of rejecting authority, of course, do not want to be in the presence of that authority. What do you do for the mocker? The same as for the fool, but sometimes the consequences have to be lifted, and sometimes the mocker must be left. Right? Remember what Paul did with the man involved in sexual sin in 1 Corinthians. I hand him over to Satan. They must hit rock bottom. Of course, the question comes up, when have you been these? When have you been the simpleton? When have you been the fool? You know better, but I think it'll work. And I pray, are we, any of us, at that point of the mocker? That is a point at which God must step in. Or human beings have to step in God's name. Tough, tough, tough conversations. And of course, the one we've been talking about the entire time, the wise, the prudent. The wise, and in Proverbs they're linked, the wise are the prudent, are the righteous. They have learned what it is to live in God's will. They know what it is up here, but they also have learned the skills, the setup, the disciplines, the practices that lead to living in God's will. And here's where the prudence comes in. They also carefully lay out plans for their obedience. This is from the introduction to Proverbs in the English Standard Version. They are prepared, again, not only for doing God's will in religious matters or moral matters, but in running their business, in raising their families. They have a vision through study, through knowledge, through involvement in the community of God's people to see and understand God's will. And then they've practiced doing God's will. And they look far enough ahead in life, realizing that God is in charge, but look far enough ahead to plan their steps, as Roger McCowan used to say. Instead of asking God to bless the life we've chosen, maybe we ought to ask God to give us a life which He can bless, right? To choose that life which He will bless. That's what the wise have done. Here, again, echoing back to Genesis 1, the fruit of the righteous is the tree of life. The one who is wise saves lives, not only himself, but his family, his community. Right? This is the nutrition. This is the blessing, which will not only result in individual blessing, but communal blessing, as his skills, as his righteousness spreads out as others imitate. The teaching of the wise is a fountain of life. We go from the food to the liquid, the water, the fountain of life, turning a person from the snares of death. All right, so be looking for those four characters as we go through. Closing thoughts here. Just some words for today. I was reading a blog this morning who said it's no wonder that we're feeling tired right now. This year in January began like 1974 with an impeachment. Then it quickly became 1918, the Spanish flu, the pandemic. And then shortly thereafter, as we were experiencing that, it became 1929 and the stock market crash and the economic outcomes. And now, these last few weeks, it's become 1968 with massive urban protests. Now, we're tired. And I don't know about you, but in our family, when people become tired, they begin to say foolish things they haven't thought through. And I think perhaps even post them. So as we look through this katina, this series of Proverbs, I'd just like for you to hear them and think through. What would we be like if we, instead of joining in the anger and the frustration, if we became a people whose words were the fountain of life? Think next time you go on Facebook or Twitter. Whoever derides their neighbor has no sense, but the one who has understanding holds their tongue. Think next time you're so angry you just want to make them hurt. The words of the wicked lie in wait for blood, but the speech of the upright rescues them. Fools show their annoyance at once, but the prudent overlook an insult. Let that one stew for a moment. Jumping on to chapter 12. The words of the reckless pierce like swords, and I fear many people, when they go on social media, that in some ways is their goal. But the tongue of the wise brings healing. Are our words reflections of the will of the great physician, the great healer? Deceit is in the heart of those who plot evil, but those who promote peace have joy. Are we the ones who actively work for shalom, that original goodness, the well-being, the flourishing of the culture? Is that who we are? The Lord detests lying lips, but He delights in people who I would have thought said tell the truth, but He says people who are trustworthy, people whom He can trust, people who will be doing the job, fulfilling the place, the task to which they have been assigned. Again, the prudent keep their knowledge to themselves, but a fool's heart blurts out folly. One of Abraham Lincoln's favorite short proverbs, not biblical, but it reflects a biblical truth, is better to be thought a fool, remain silent and be thought a fool, than to speak and remove all doubt. Okay. Sometimes, perhaps, in our culture, we need to listen more than we solemnly affirm, and maybe advertisement for Sunday morning. Maybe we need to ask questions that will help people, and including ourselves, to come to a deeper understanding of truth. Last screen. Oh, how we need this. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. The tongue of the wise adorns knowledge. That is, we decorate it, we bring it out in all its beauty. But the mouth of the fool gushes foolishness. What would you expect? A soothing tongue is a tree of life. As we soothe, as we bless, as we bring peace, shalom, we are that tree, we are that nourishment to the culture, rather than being the one who crushes the spirit. And finally, a hot-tempered person stirs up conflict, but the one who is patient calms a quarrel. May God enable us to be those who speak and act in ways that promote the deepest shalom, the peace that passes understanding, as ambassadors of the Prince of Peace. I pray that you have a wonderful rest of the week. Next Wednesday, Steve McVeigh will lead us in a study of Proverbs 16 through 20. May God bless us as we do His will.